Hi, Magic School for Teens and Kids. Just give me 1 second. Hi, Magic School for Teens and Kids. Welcome to Introduction to Maya Mythology. I have now sorted the audio issue and we can continue on our journey. Here on the right-hand side, I have a photo of one of the most famous Maya sites in the world, Tikal. It's known for being featured in one of the Star Wars movies. I don't know which one, but it is known as one of the largest sites too. It's a very magical place because it's deep in the jungle. And on the left, I have a picture of a Maya calendar plus the Maya staple crops, which are peppers, corn, squash, and beans. Anyway, let's go on. So today, we're going to talk about we're going to have some introductory notes first, and then we're going to talk about the origin of the Maya and creation stories. Then we're going to talk about deities, sacred sites, and pilgrimages. So before we start, the purpose of this talk is to spark your curiosity. Now let's look at the map. Do you know where the Maya live? I think you can see my cursor. So this is the Maya territory, which corresponds to here, this little tip of Mexico, down in the southeast, Guatemala, Belize, a little bit of El Salvador, a little bit of Honduras. Circles up again, right here. As you can follow my cursor. That's right. And I said it correctly. The Maya are still living there. Their descendants are numerous. Maya speakers alone are an estimate of 6 million for some people. And those are just the Maya speakers. Not all descendants of the Maya speak Maya languages anymore. And this is because of the historical background of colonialism. As you may know, I'm a social scientist, and when I look at things, I like to look at the social historical context. So before we begin, I'd like to mention that we actually don't know everything there is to know about Maya mythology or culture. A lot of things have been misinterpreted in the past. Buildings were destroyed because of the colonial history, which started many, many centuries ago. I mean, the books and codices were largely burned around 1562. I think there are only 4 that survived in collectors' hands. In Europe, for example, I think 3 are in Europe and 1 might be in Mexico. I think that one might have been recovered later. The priesthood and their students were murdered. So the literati, because not everyone could read back then. And they used the glyph system, as you saw before in the Maya calendar I showed you. And that was replaced by Latin script. So when we look at later collections of Maya knowledge that use a Latin script, we understand that they came after the colonial history and actually have been influenced. So the things inside, the stories and myths, have been influenced to some extent by colonialism and colonial thought. Now, Maya people, they're not just one homogeneous blob like anywhere else. There are many different kinds of Maya people. And today, mainly, we'll be looking at the ones up here. If you look at the screen, up here in the Yucatan Peninsula, that's where all my little green flags are. Obviously, I've been there a number of times and stayed there before for months. And down here, for example, in Guatemala, there are different kinds of people, and these are another kinds of Maya people that we'll be focusing on. Of course, the Maya people are also very numerous over here in Belize and in the border area between Belize and Guatemala, where Tikal and numerous ruins lay. I mean, there are numerous ruins in the jungles are covered that have not been excavated, and there's a lot of knowledge still hidden underneath. And I encourage you to go to the lands to see for yourself. And not only that, I want to mention that there are new archaeological discoveries all the time. So what we know is constantly changing, just like any other field. Now let's go look at the origin of the Maya. Give me a second. Origin of the Maya. Now, this is just one theory. I mean, there are many theories in all different types of studies, and this is not different from that. So I'd like to mention one theory that states that the Maya seemed to appear out of nowhere around 3100 BC, and that their ancestors arrived by boats that moved without paddles around actually later, earlier than that, now 9600 BC. Apparently, they arrived from the Atoll or Atitlan, where water has swallowed their homelands. And when I say that, speculation is that these are survivors, high priests and priests from Atlantis. And that the canoe people, the people of the serpent, led by Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Zamna, each of whom led sages, 7 sages, were in charge of building or rebuilding civilization here, so the Atlantean civilization. Now, this is just one theory. I'd like you to consider it and keep it in mind, just keep it open mind. And according to the same theory, it's Samna and his water wizards that it's brought math, knowledge of the stars, jade carving, agriculture, architecture, and sacred knowledge with them. If you've looked at ancient histories or ancient civilizations, this might sound a bit familiar. Because the theory is that when Atlantis sunk, that survivors, even beforehand perhaps, had started moving to different areas of the world and spreading their civilization so that the knowledge would survive. They also brought with them the knowledge of the laws of nature and how to bend these laws. Very cool. They also taught about nonviolence, compassion, and humility. And apparently, the paddler gods sailed along the Milky Way itself towards Orion, which they consider the heart of creation, the origin of the gods. And here you might want to look at some pictures. It's up to interpretation. There are different theories about what they portray, but definitely there's canoes and there's deities. Very interesting. Now, there are numerous creation stories. And remember I told you that we would focus on 2 different areas today, the Yucatan area and the Guatemalan highlands. Well, in the Yucatan area, there was one text written in Latin script called the Chilambalam. And the Chilambalam of Chumayel states that there were actually 4 Atlantean gods, and these giants were called Bacchus. Some believe that they were the sons of Ischel, the moon goddess, and the great god Itzamna, both of whom we'll mention later in this presentation. Apparently, in one great sudden rush of water, great serpent was ravished from the heavens. The sky fell down and the dry land sank when the 4 gods, the 4 Bacchus, arose, who had brought about the annihilation of the world. So here is another flood story for those of you familiar with biblical stories tied to the Abrahamic traditions or Sumerian texts, for example. I mean, worldwide, there are many, many flood stories, and here's one of them. And this is a picture of not a flood, no, it's a picture of a cenote. So when I mention cenotes later, you know what I mean. They occur on the Yucatan Peninsula and beyond, and they're places where apparently meteorites struck and brought rivers underground. So yes, you can actually go from the top, you see roots of trees and stuff. You can actually jump into them. Anyways, they're actually sacred spots. So not every cenote is accessible. Some are though. Anyways, back to our story. After the destruction was complete, the 4 pillars of the sky, backup trees, were re-established, and the great mother Seika rose amidst recollections of the destruction of the earth. So the 4 Atlantean gods held up the 4 corners of the world, and in the center grew a huge ceiba tree. What is a ceiba tree? Well, I have a picture of one there. It's not a very big one. They can grow much larger than that. But note the very special roots. So you can recognize them easily by the very cool roots. So when you visit, you'll know which tree is ceiba tree. And if you don't, I'm sure someone will tell you because they very much love their sacred ceiba trees because they consider the cosmic tree. So this tree at the center of creation, the 4 corners of the world, right in the middle, with roots growing deep into the underworld and branches reaching up to support the heavens. This is the cosmic tree, the ceiba tree. Now, that is not the only creation story for the Maya. I'm sure there are numerous versions, but here's another version, and this one is from the Guatemalan highlands, and it was in a text also written in Latin script called the Popol Vuh, which is the great epic of the Quiche Maya. So, and this is only one population of Maya that lived in the area. There are so many. I mean, around the Lake Catitan, there are numerous different, I suppose, nations of Maya people, each with their own languages, their own beliefs, their own history, diversity. Anyways, creation story number 2. The forefather gods, Tepu and Kukumats, aka the plume serpent, brought forth the earth from a watery void, together with the storm god Huracan, and endowed it with animals and plants. Anxious for praise and veneration after the creation, the divine progenitors fashioned human-like creatures from mud. But to mud they returned. A race of wooden figures appeared next, also created by these beings, who very much wanted to be venerated. The wooden figures spoke, but they had no facial expressions. They refused to speak to the gods, let alone worship them. So Huracan destroyed them with a black rain deluge and a flood of resin. Their descendants apparently became the monkeys. And here in the middle of this creation story, it says that evil gods roamed the earth, and Huracan dispatched the hero twins, Guanapu and Xblanque, to prepare the world for people. I mean, this is really a myth within a myth. I mean, the story of the hero twins itself is a whole book. So I'm not going to go too deep into this. I'm just going to mention this part before we move on. Finally, true humans, the ancestors of the Quiche, were created from maize dough, what we call corn. They were all seeing and wise, these people that were created. They thanked the gods, but the gods didn't like how far they could see. So Huracan blew into their eyes, which clouded, and then they could only see up close. Now, before we move on, I'd like to share with you a picture from this area, well, the general area around Lake Atitlan. I wrote here it's from San Juan La Laguna, but it's around the Lake Atitlan somewhere. Anyways, it shows the 4 corners. So each of the directions has a different color, each held up by a different guardian. Before we said bacchus, but here it says something slightly different. They are just called the guardians. And I'm going to read it out loud for you. At midnight, the heavens open, and from the 4 cardinal points, the guardians extend their hands over their pueblos, or towns. Volcanoes and lake in the east. Grandfather Sun is reborn in the west. Grandmother Moon goes down into the underworld. In the north, you see the Sakve, or the White Road, And from the south rise the Shumsomil, Shukumil. Sorry, I don't speak this language. The wind that is the spirit of the lake. And the lake we're talking about here is Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. Notice the similarities between Lake Atitlan's name and the name of Atoll or Atitlan, which some theorize refer to Atlantis. So some Maya deities. Well, before I mentioned Itzamna and Ixchel. Ixchel is my favorite Mayan deity for obvious reasons, because I'm very much into the goddess and all her representations. But first, let's talk about Itzamna. Itzamna, who has many names, was the Yucatan Maya sky god, the god of heaven and the sun, and the supreme deity and lord of all gods. He was also seen as a scribe and learned person, the bringer of writing and sciences. Ixchel, the moon goddess of medicine, childbirth, and weaving. And I want to mention here something that's not in the presentation. Is that during my time in Lake Atitlan, I learned how venerated midwives are, how it's a very sacred calling to be a medicine woman. Not everyone can be a midwife. And there, when you're called to be a midwife, it means you actually have to do it, or else basically things happen until you go and walk upon your path. It's very, very special calling. Anyways, moving on. Oh, sorry, I didn't mention. This is a statue of Ixchel on the Isla Mujeres off the coast of the Yucatan in the east. So if you imagine Cancun, you can go east from there on a boat and reach the Isla Mujeres, Island of the Women. And it was named that way because when some Maya deities, well, I can't talk about all my deities. I don't know if I mentioned, there are so many of them. I mean, there are hundreds of them, but some you have heard about already, perhaps. They include the paddler gods, and here the maize god, the corn god. The two deities that are known as the paddler gods have, on one hand, jaguar-like feathers, and on the other hand, so the other one, with a stingray through the septum of his nose. Together they row the maize god on his watery journey into death and rebirth. And before I look at the picture, I want to go to the hero twins, whom I mentioned before in the creation stories, in one of the creation stories. So the Popol Vuh calls them the Hunapu and Xblanque. Hunapu is recognizable by the black spots on his face and body, Xblanque by patches of jaguar skin. Now we can look at this plate from northern Guatemala or southern Campeche. In the center is the maize god. He's emerging from the split surface of the earth, which is depicted as a turtle, and the hero twins stand beside him. The one on the left is swirling water, and he's the one with the dots all over him, while his counterpart on the right, with the jaguar pelt markings, pours water to ensure the sprouting of corn. So as in many cultures and mythologies, there is a rebirth, the death and the rebirth of a god or goddess. It's very cyclical. Time for the Maya was cyclical. And next I'd like to talk about sacred sites. So here I'm not going to mention all the ruins that are famous, Tikal, Chichen Itza, Tulum. I mean, they are numerous. Beautiful, beautiful sacred sites. Not all of them have been excavated, as I said, and many have just been discovered, actually, by new technology and not open for tourists or even excavation at this point. Anyways, but what I want to mention is that to this day, traditional ceremonies continue to be performed in sacred sites. So as I said, Maya culture is very alive nowadays. It's not something that we read about that was in ancient times with like mythological beings that people a long time ago talked about. No, they still remember, they still talk about these beings. And these sites, although we may call them ruins, are still sacred sites in which ceremonies are performed. And I want to mention again the cenotes in the Yucatan Peninsula. Here is the picture I showed you before. And the cenote is named Cenote Taj Mahal because it sounds like, you know, Taj Mahal in India. I think it's a play on words. But you have to look that up yourself, okay? Anyways, and the other place I want to show you is a picture from Guatemala. It's called the Parque Arqueológica Iximche. So this is a lesser known site. It's not Tikal, it's not Chichen Itza, but here it has signs. And you see one clear says altar ceremonial. It's quite a large site. I'm just showing you the ceremonial area. So following the signs, I reached this large site in which there were Maya performing ceremonies. Obviously, it's not respectful to take pictures of people performing ceremonies unless they have given permission or it's a public ceremony that includes tourists or other foreigners, for example. So I waited till they left and then I came here to take a quick photo and showing some of the sites where offerings were burnt. In this area, the Maya sometimes burn candles. I will show you in a later photo that will show you things more clearly. It's like different colors of candles and then also flowers, for example. Other sacred sites where traditional ceremonies continue to take place include on volcanoes such as Volcan San Pedro. So if you look at the lower right-hand picture, it's taken from San Marco La Laguna. And I believe across from that is Volcan San Pedro. I actually stayed for a month on the foothill of San Pedro in a town called San Pedro. And I know for a fact from Maya themselves that they actually have ceremonies for themselves up on the volcano. So nobody else is allowed. Only they're allowed in these special sacred sites or sacred places on the volcano to do ceremonies. And also another place that they have ceremonies is besides sacred lakes such as Lake Atitlán. Here's a picture of a ceremony that foreigners are also welcome in. Pictures are welcome in. And as you might notice, I am taking the picture from behind the medicine man hosting the ceremony. He has various assistants. I believe he was the main medicine man of the ceremony. And I don't know if you can see clearly in your pictures, but there's a lot of different colored flowers. And the candles, there's kind of like thin candles, almost the size of like a highlighter, it seems. Different colored candles, and they stack them up in very nice geometrical patterns in concentric circles, and they light them up. And it's a very beautiful thing to see. Maybe you'd like to have a look online if you're curious about it. Last but not least, I'd like to mention pilgrimages. Now, to all these sacred sites, you can go on pilgrimages. But as I mentioned, East my favorite deity of the Maya pantheon, and I like to use this pilgrimage to illustrate how alive their culture is. Every year, on the 26th of May, hundreds of Mayan canoes filled with pilgrims cross the Caribbean Sea to Cozumel. Now, where is Cozumel? Cozumel is close to the Isla Mujeres that I mentioned before, off the coast, the east coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. So if you go from Cancun, probably the most well-known city there, you head east. That's not where the boats go from, of course. It goes from further down south in a different town. That is now kind of like a watery theme park. But still, every year, hundreds of Maya canoes filled with pilgrims cross the Caribbean Sea to Cozumel. In a ceremony of dancing and singing, they leave offerings of flowers and food and images of the goddess. Traditionally, Maya women and girls would make a pilgrimage to Ixchel's temple twice in their lives. First, when they were taken there with their mothers, and then when they were taking their own daughters. Anyways, it's a very interesting pilgrimage if you'd like to read more about it or see pictures of it. But right here, I have pictures from my own visit to honor Ixchel. So on the island of Cozumel, if you want to look it up, it's in the Zona Arqueológica San Gervasio, and this is the temple of the goddess. So the site, again, is quite large. And there are many, many different temples and different structures. But if you go, you'll probably see guides. You can ask the guide or tell them specifically that you would like to see the temple of the goddess, and they most likely will show you anyways. If you look at the window there, I don't remember the specific alignment, but the window there from a certain angle has a special alignment that I no longer remember because it was told to me by someone special. Anyways, this is a site where they have ceremonies. Of course, afterwards they clean up and stuff like that, just like in the other site you saw. So there are, for example, there's nothing left over because this is considered, again, an archaeological zone. So it's very fascinating, this, I think, that so much can still be found out by excavations, because so much of the Maya landscape was changing, with different weather, different political things happening. It wasn't that one site, Chichen Itza, for example, was inhabited throughout the thousands of years of Mayan civilization. No, like people came here, they went there. Some sites became, how should I say, taken back by nature. They're covered in greenery and look just like hills. And there we still find many, many different glyphs and different remnants of their history and their mythology. And these are important because, as I mentioned, most of the text, most of the knowledge was destroyed before. So it's a rediscovery. And as I said, there are many different theories about so many different things. And it's very fascinating. If you're interested, please do have a look. I do have some references written here in each slide. But yeah, feel free to email Magic School for Teens and Kids with any questions, or if you want any recommendations, or if you're going to my territories and want to ask me about something specific to do there or to see there, or want to know about my own experiences in those lands. So again, please feel free to email Magic School for Teens and Kids, or comment on the social media platforms such as Instagram or Facebook, and the comments will get back to me and I will get back to you. So I hope you enjoyed our time together exploring Maya mythology, and I will see you on the next class, on the next video. So live or on replay, you're always welcome. Goodbye now.